figure. We think he was born when they lived in Sunderland, and he would have been born 1763, 1764. We don't know, no birth records, there's no records. But later on, when he moved to Canada, Sue Warren lives now, he gave his age as 50. So by subtraction, that would come up to having been born around 1763.
Oh, okay.
He's over there taking trips.
Then the next place he went was Teignmouth. He went to Teignmouth for a short time. He was justice of the peace in Teignmouth, and then he put the patent in for this land and moved here. So he was actually here by,
He wanted to come home.
I think it was 1781, 82, 83, something like that is when he made the application for the patent. Yeah.
So I wouldn't feel it.
I don't think it had individual names. It was just opened up for settlement as part of, at the time, as part of the
Let's all go back. That's right. Brother, we didn't know David was born. Very good. We thought he was very different. We discovered that. So, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's what we do. I was telling him something. Here, we just looked down and all you saw was people all the way down. So the dam turns out so the people up in Canada.
Like I'm on with the wind. Well, she's had a million houses. Yeah, they're beautiful. She's got a bunch of them. She's got the whole.
Way to lie is if it's a private cemetery.
Yeah. You guys Yeah, I remember you. It keeps popping up. Well, the high-tech stuff now.
I did it in 1997, and I haven't had time to look at it again.
I remember when you did it, yeah. You did it around the time you had the one here to Gideon. Yeah. You both seem to talk every time you talk about that stuff.
You search for certain things.
Yeah, I noticed that.
No, I framed it and everything. It's right here by the back.
Going down to the you listen to some of the competitors talk. So you know some of the questions they ask them still on each other. It's a lot of this. It's my first time over here. I'm not sure what you're doing.
That's the one. That's the one. That's the one. I think it's right there.
Well, Durham and remember Lake in town where they got strung around it.
My frame is there. That's right. I was big
I think that we followed them all the way out to King yesterday.
That's a good
And
question. Unless
then they like they turned and went up the mountain there. But then once you get finished doing that, you come all the way back in. You want to get the pin on? Yeah. And then they come back and you got to do the marathon, 26 miles. And all in one day. Not even good at it.
Well, no, I think I.
She needs to spend it all the time. It should go somewhere different.
invocation, eternal God, with hearts filled with love and gratitude, we gather to ask thy blessing on this marker placed in honor of David Bishop Warren, an American Revolutionary War patriot. The unequaled liberties enjoyed in America today are the legacy of brave, strong patriots. Their deep faith and belief in thy guidance, together with the hope of living in freedom, fortified them throughout the war for independence. We give thee thanks, O Lord, for thy many blessings, and ask thy Holy Spirit be with us always. May we never forget those who fought for the freedom of their new country. Amen. Our color guard. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm going to play the role of historian briefly. I'll try to respect the fact that there are no chairs for you all to sit in, so I'll try to make it brief. those of us that are descended from the Warren family have a wonderful legacy. These people, going way back, have always been the movers and shakers. They have always gotten involved in town affairs. They have been very, very much contributors to their villages and towns and state and counties. So I'd like to go back, and I'm going to mention 3 different names to you for you to remember. First of all, we have Jabez Warren. Jabez was the grandfather of Gideon. I'm sorry, the father of Gideon. Jabez was born in 1690, thereabouts. We don't know exactly where, but we do know that he had migrated as far west as Lebanon, Connecticut in 1716, where he married a lady by the name of Mary. We don't know what Mary's last name was. We do know that her first 2 letters in her last name were B.I. There were Bissels in Lebanon, Connecticut at the time. There were also bishops in Lebanon at the time. So she could have been Mary Bissell or Mary Bishop. We're not sure. By 1718, Jabez and Mary had migrated west to what was then the frontier of Massachusetts. And they were living in Brimfield, which at the time was in Hampton County. Hampshire County. Now it's in Hampton County. They started having their children in Brimfield, and Gideon was born in 1730 in Brimfield. The things that were going on in the States at that time were a little scary, and so they all decided that they were going to travel up to the real northwestern frontier of Massachusetts and become colonial scouts. So that was Jabez the father, Jabez the son, and Gideon. They were colonial scouts in Coleraine, Massachusetts for a little bit. Then they were at Fort Massachusetts for a little while. And they ended up at Fort Hoosick. Fort Hoosick is where Williamstown, Massachusetts now stands. It was the perimeter of the frontier. They were guarding against incursions by the French, by the Indians, and by all kinds of other things that could be going on. There were scalpings. There were all kinds of nasty things going on at the time in our colonial history. And so that is where these gentlemen spent quite a few years. Gideon had a patent for land that spanned the Green River, both sides of the Green River. And if you look at a map of Williamstown, Massachusetts, you can see the Green River winds its way right through town. And their prerequisite in getting the patent was that they had to build a frame home, a little 15 by 18 foot frame dwelling. They had to clear the land. They had to plant some crops. And that is how they were instructed to settle their property. That Fort Hoosick, closed in 1761. And Gideon and Jabez the father and Jabez the son went right across the line into the Hampshire Grants, now Vermont, and settled at Pownell. In Pownell, they were moderators of the town meetings, they were proprietors' clerks, they had town meetings in their homes, and they were very involved in the affairs of Pownell. Then, having itchy feet, they decided to migrate just a little bit further north and slightly east of Pownell, and they settled in Sunderland, Vermont. Sunderland is where we think David Bishop Warren was born. David Bishop was born sometime between 1763 and 1764. We don't know the exact date. We do know from some Canadian records that he gives his age as 50. And if you backtrack from 50, it would be sometime between 1763 and 1764. It was also during their stay in Pownell that we think that Gideon's wife, whom he had married back in Brimfield, and her name was Ann Bishop, that she probably passed away while they were in Sunderland, as perhaps did his father, because his father isn't mentioned after Sunderland. So now it was just Gideon and his brother Jabez. And so after the birth of these kids, there were things going on in this state and in the Hampshire grants over the line, where there were a lot of border disputes about property lines. Where was the actual property line of what is now Vermont? There's a 20-mile wide strip of land that separates the Vermont border now and the Hudson River. And that 20-mile wide strip went back and forth. The Yorkers would come over and attack, and then the Green Mountain Boys were formed, and they would push them back across the border. There was at least one murder during the course of all of those border disputes, and Gideon Warren signed up to be a Green Mountain Boy with Ethan Allen. And he was one of the leaders. He was a lieutenant in the Green Mountain Boys. He's described as having a very even disposition. He could get things done by working nicely with people instead of going at it hammer and tongs. So he was one of the leaders of the Green Mountain Boys. In 1771, the family moved up to Pittsford, Vermont. And Gideon was the proprietor's clerk in 1771 in Pittsford. And at about the same time, there were rumorings of the fact that these colonists needed to really defend themselves. They needed to do something that mattered. And so there was a lot of conversation going on between different states about how to approach the need to strengthen our frontier up this way. And so Gideon and his Green Mountain Boys started talking about defending, attacking Fort Ticonderoga. And on the 10th of May of 1775, they went up Lake Champlain. They met at a wonderful little brown farmhouse on the Vermont side, which was pointed out to us on a boat ride this week from Fort Ticonderoga, that is where they met, and that is where they strategized about attacking the fort. The fort had not been very well defended. There were people there, but they were caught sleeping when Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys attacked. So there were no guns fired. There was no battle. They basically took over the fort that day. And that was the beginning, the real first beginning of the Revolutionary War in America. And Fort Ty is referred to as America's first fort. That's what's on their sign up there. I highly recommend a trip to Fort Ticonderoga if you haven't been, and take the boat ride. It's wonderful. So after the battle, Gideon decided that he would settle in Teignmouth. So he moved to Teignmouth, and he was Justice of the Peace in Teignmouth for a while. And then he put in a request for a patent of land in what was Greenfield. 500 acres in Greenfield. That's where we're standing. Greenfield became Hampton, New York. He owned that property over there, all of this property, all the way down to the corner, I think, right?
And all the way up to County 18.
Right.
Quite a few.
And so he donated land for a church, Christ Episcopal Church, which sat right here on this northwest corner. He donated land for a schoolhouse, which was at the far side of the cemetery down the hill. And he donated this land that we're standing on for a cemetery. And his grave here by the American flag was one of the first burials in Hampton Cemetery. It was called Hampton Hill Cemetery at the time. Now it's called Warren Cemetery. So my David Bishop Warren got married in 1784 in Pulteney, Vermont. He married a girl by the name of Grace Fletcher. She was the daughter of the town selectman during 1775, and her father had passed by the time she and David Bishop Warren married. He decided, after a few years in Pulteney, to go up to South Hero, Vermont. Bill and I have traveled up to South Hero. We've looked at the land. Thanks for the configuration of the shoreline on Lake Champlain. You can easily see from a map today, compared to the land property maps of yesteryear, you can pretty much tell where he lived, overlooking Lake Champlain with the Adirondack Mountains in the distance. So they lived there, they had some more children, and then by 1788 he is listed on the tax list as a freeman in South Hero, and he's on the 1793 grand list, they call it, which is also like a tax list. But when we got into the 1790s, he started having those worn itchy feet again. And he started exploring the possibility of getting some land, very reasonably priced, over in Canada. So he got 95 other Vermont residents and put in a request to the Quebec government for some land, which would have been just south of Montreal, in the Trois-Rivières area, Three Rivers area of Quebec. He went through many machinations during several years, and eventually I have a document which says that the people in Quebec had decided not to give these 96 people land in Tingwick Township in Trois-Rivières because they had been found to be of the Democratic Society of Vermont. So I guess that did not sit well with those people up there. So he got in with a very shady character by the name of William Fortune. And William Fortune was originally from South Carolina. And he hobnobbed around with Cornwallis, actually, down there. And of course, they were both loyalists. And so William Fortune ran north and ended up in Canada as a deputy surveyor. And he talked to David Bishop Warren about this new township of Buckingham, which is on the north side of what's now the Ottawa River. It was called the Grand River. And David Bishop Warren bought 6 lots in the township of Buckingham. It's just slightly east and, of course, north across the river from where the city of Ottawa is today. And I have a map that shows that he owned 2 lots right on the lake, 2 lots just behind that, and 2 lots the third range back. So they spent about 5 years there, because when he went to apply for land in Hawkesbury, which is in Prescott County, right near the Quebec border, he said that he had been of this province for 5 years. So he bought land in Hawkesbury on the river, found out that that land had already been deeded to someone else after he'd cleared it and tried to build a house and everything. Then he found out it wasn't really his land to deal with, and so he moved further south in Prescott and set up housekeeping in West Hawkesbury, very near a little town called Van Cleek Hill. We've been there too, and thanks to the Canadian concessions and lots, Susan Warren, it's easy to kind of look at today's map and look at the concessions and lots that were awarded to the person and figure out about where their property might have been. So we took pictures, and we went to Van Cleek Hill, and we went to the Caspern Cemetery, which is where 2 of David Bishop's uncles were buried. And so in 1810, the itchy feet syndrome got him again, and he bought some land from a fella in South Crosby. Now, probably I can imagine him going down the Ottawa River to the Rideau, and then going down the Rideau, he'd have to portage around all the falls and everything because the canal was not built yet at that time, right, Susan?
Yeah.
And so, but eventually he got to South Crosby, and South Crosby was really, it had a lot of promise, because not only was it closer to the St. Lawrence River, but now with the canal that was dug and the locks that were put in and everything, they could get produce and commerce from both Ottawa on the north and the St. Lawrence from the south. And so he lived in South Crosby until at least 1828, when he sold his land there to his son Artemus, And then he migrated south and came back home here to Hampton where his family was. And so in all the places that he lived, in South Crosby, he was a town assessor, he was a land agent, he was very involved, David Bishop, in the goings on of the town. Every place the Warren family lived, they made a difference. So for those of us that descend from the Warren family, we have some good genes. So that's the history, and now we'll go on with the, all right. In remembering the past, we honor the men and women who gave their lives for the preservation of our freedoms and our future.
Father, we thank Thee for the life of this Revolutionary War patriot, David Bishop Warren, whose service to country and heroic sacrifices aided and advanced the cause of independence. Help us recognize that fidelity and integrity must guard always the heritage bequeathed by those who had everything to lose. Amen.
Help us to be worthy of our noble deed. Our forefathers put their faith in You, O Lord, and You have delivered them to this land of plenty.
Almighty God, bless our country. May we, its citizens, be thankful for the blessings Thou hast bestowed upon us. Keep our country, home, and family under Thy loving protection.
History tells us what is needed today is not just a show of greatness and a parade of power, but a dedication to great ideals and high endeavors. Therefore, I, a member of Charles Parish Chapter, National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution, now dedicate this marker in grateful recognition of the service of David Bishop Warren, a patriot in the American Revolution.
Now, may grace, mercy, and love abide with us all, now and evermore.
Retire the colors. While they're marching away, I'd like to read you something. Dear ancestor, your tombstone stands among the rest, neglected and alone. The name and date have worn off the red slate stone. It reaches out to all who care. It's now too late to mourn. You did not know that we'd exist. You died and we were born. Yet each of us are cells of you, in flesh, in blood, in bone. Our hearts contract and beat a pulse, entirely not our own. Dear ancestor, the place you filled 200 years ago spreads out among the ones you left, who would have loved you so. We wonder how you lived and loved. We wonder if you knew that someday we would find this place and come to visit you. We wonder if your heart would swell with pride and feelings dear, to know that we would come to you with feelings most sincere. We wish that we had known you, and you had known us all. We honor you this day and time, for all you were and more. Our hearts beat to your fife and drum, in flesh and blood and bone. You are not alone, for we're with you. Love and welcome. like to share with you today before we go to the town hall. I need to get back down. Phil's probably David Bishop Warren stone. Whether it was ever engraved or whether the surface has just fallen off, we're not sure. But Bruce said, you know what, I want to be involved in this. I'll support the effort to buy a tombstone and have it put up for David Bishop Warren. And I said, well, what about we try to get one for free from the United States government? So I made the application to the Department of Veterans Affairs. Obviously, it was a little difficult to prove some of the things they wanted, like a death certificate in 1829. Sorry about that. So I had to do what those of us in DAR do when we're doing an application with some diverse situations. We have to do an analysis. And we have to try to pull together all these different aspects of a person's life and make sense out of it all so that the genealogist up in DC can look at our analysis and see what we see and make the connection. And so that's what I did for David Bishop. I got the set in stone book that was done by Lindy McCullen, who used to be the town historian, and she read all these graves. And the epitaphs, the gravestone material is written in her book. With that in one hand and Find a Grave in another, and also my family tree maker program, I found 18 of this man's relatives buried in this cemetery. And in the margin, I wrote the exact relationship between each of those people and David Bishop Warren, so they could see. So one day I get a phone call, and I look at my caller ID and it says Pitt, Ohio, and I thought, that's a robocall. But I'm standing by the phone, I'm just not answering it. And this lady said, I'm looking for Jill Russell. I have a tombstone to be delivered to you tomorrow. And I thought, yes! And so then I realized in driving up and down the interstate, all those trucks that say Pitt, Ohio on, you know, that was Pitt, Ohio that delivered this stone to my garage that day in Virginia. So we brought the stone up Monday and delivered it over at Hicks Memorials, and Mike Hicks set it that very Tuesday morning, and so we're very grateful. Janet Muff. Janet's standing right back there. Her husband is Bruce, right?
Jim Boyce.
Jim Boyce. I had part of the beef part right. I've never met the guy, but he's actually a descendant of David Bishop Warren too. And she's the one who had a ground-penetrating radar study of the area where these red shale stones are. And there are 2 adult bodies buried here. We don't know who they are. We think that's David Bishop. We think this may be Comfort Warren. Comfort Warren was a half-brother of David Bishop, different mother, but he lived in this area, so we think perhaps he's in the other grave. I would also like to thank Ann. I met Ann 20 years ago when we did the grave marking for Gideon in this cemetery. And Ann and Bill have now bought a place down in Williamsburg, so I get to see her in the winter months. She even comes to some of my meetings, my chapter meetings down there in Virginia. So I want to thank her, and she and Bill are hosting the reception, which will follow this event right down the hill and to the left at the town hall. And I want to thank also Dave O'Brien for allowing us to have that function at the town hall. I also want to thank my friend Tim Smith. Tim Smith volunteers at the Yorktown National Battlefield Park in Yorktown, Virginia. And I met Tim, I think I was buying Valentine's cards at Hallmark. And Tim was in this store, and I said, hey Tim, you want to take a road trip? And he said, well, maybe. What do you have in mind? And I said, it's a long one. It's all the way to New York. But I knew that no one could play taps like Tim Smith. Tim Smith used to teach music at one of the high schools close to where we live. And he's involved not only in Revolutionary War reenacting, but he also was involved in Civil War reenacting, as is Russell here. And so we know Tim from several different aspects, but I need to tell you, that's friendship when someone will come all this way to play a penny whistle and a bugle for our ceremony today.
It was a long walk.
And Patrick Smith, his son, who is now stationed at Fort Drum, very conveniently. I'm glad the government heard me ask you to go to Fort Drum. At least it made two reasons why Tim would come this far. But Captain Smith has served his country bravely, and he has a brother that also just got back from overseas deployment in inhospitable lands. So we thank you both for your service, and we thank Tim for serving us today. I also want to thank Bill Russell. We may seem like a very unlikely pair.
I think you're perfect.
Thank you, Ann. It's because of Bill and his willingness to help me with my genealogical research that we have driven up and down the eastern seaboard. We've been into Canada. We visited Sue Warren twice now in the past however many years with the Warren genealogy on, the top of our list of discussions. We've been to all the places that David Bishop Warren lived, over to Prescott County, Ontario. We went to South Hero, Vermont. We've been everywhere, not just for the Warren family, but for other members of my family. And as I said, Bill is a Civil War reenactor. He wears kind of a gray jacket, not a blue jacket. But nevertheless, we have the love of history in common. I've done his family genealogy as well. And so I want to thank you, Bill Russell. I got Bill into the SAR a few years ago, and being a reenactor, Bill wasn't happy carrying a United States flag that was made out of nylon for today's ceremony. So Bill Russell bought a new set of dowels, put them together, bought that beautiful shiny brass eagle for the top of the flag, and bought a new American flag that was more, appropriate for this occasion. Okay. I want to thank all of you who came today. It's said that nothing is really ended until it's forgotten. Whatever is kept in memory still endures. Let this event be a tribute to David Bishop Warren, his life, his service, and the family who carries on his legacy. That's it. Join us down the hill and slightly to the left. You'll see the Hampton Town Hall. Dave O'Brien has allowed us how we can use his facility for a little reception, during time to talk. Yeah. So meet us down there. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
You and I can. I can do this with that. I can do this with that.
Now, she said B.I. Bissell. Oh, I have it. Well, Bishop makes sense with that. Was that
One of the things you have to learn to be always correct for river.
Yeah, I
Get
know.
never mark.
Well, I only drive locally. I don't.
We have a website which is Local 58.